Good morning, and welcome to our lecture on preparing for negotiations in Canada's unique business environment. Today, we'll explore 15 critical preparation strategies and 3 case studies to equip you with the tools to navigate complex negotiations, whether in labor disputes, trade agreements, or corporate mergers. Canada's multicultural landscape, strict regulations like Ph.D., and emphasis on ethical practices demand thorough preparation. We'll cover concepts like BATNA, reservation points, and overcoming the fixed pie mindset, using real-world Canadian examples. Our goal is to help you achieve value-creating outcomes while fostering long-term relationships. In addition, we will introduce the importance of preparation in Canada's diverse context, setting the stage for our first topic, the fixed pie perception. Negotiations in Canada require understanding cultural nuances, such as Quebec's language laws or Indigenous consultation protocols. By preparing strategically, you can avoid common pitfalls and align with Canada's emphasis on integrity and collaboration. We'll start by examining how the fixed pie mindset limits outcomes and how to shift toward a more effective approach. Let's begin with the fixed pie perception, a common barrier in negotiations. This mindset assumes resources are limited, so one party's gain is another's loss, leading to suboptimal outcomes. In Canada's diverse business landscape, with stakeholders like unions, Indigenous communities, and government bodies, this mindset can derail talks. It manifests in 3 ways: resignation, where negotiators give up early, hard bargaining, prioritizing winning over collaboration, or compromise, sacrificing potential value. For example, in a 2019 Ontario manufacturing dispute, both parties assumed wage increases would directly cut profits, leading to a prolonged strike that damaged trust. Shifting to a mixed motive approach, balancing competition and cooperation, is key. In Canada, this requires researching cultural and legal contexts, like Quebec's civil code or Indigenous protocols, to identify shared interests, such as community benefits or regulatory compliance. This preparation expands the pie, fostering better outcomes. Next, we'll explore mixed motive decision-making to see how to apply this shift. Consider a Canadian mining negotiation where a fixed pie mindset stalled talks with an Indigenous community. By preparing to understand environmental priorities, the company co-developed a sustainable plan, creating value. This sets the stage for our next topic. Building on the fixed pie discussion, let's explore mixed motive decision-making, a cornerstone of effective negotiation in Canada. This approach balances competitive goals, like securing favorable terms, with cooperative efforts to create mutual value. In Canada's multicultural and regulated environment, this balance is critical, given laws like Ph.D. or Quebec's language requirements. 3 preparation abilities are key: defining your BATNA, setting reservation points, and assessing risk tolerance. In a 2021 case study, a tech firm entering the Canadian market prepared by researching provincial tax incentives and offering local hiring commitments, aligning with Canada's economic priorities. This led to a government contract, showcasing strategic advantage through preparation. Negotiators must understand regional differences, British Columbia's environmental laws or Ontario's labor regulations, to align strategies. This slide highlights preparation's role in creating value. Let's move to self-assessment techniques to clarify your goals before negotiating. The tech firm case shows how researching local contexts and balancing interests can turn challenges into opportunities. Preparation is key to navigating Canada's diverse stakeholders, from Indigenous partners to trade bodies, leading us to our next topic. Now that we've covered mixed motive decision-making, let's focus on self-assessment techniques, essential for clarifying your negotiation goals in Canada. This involves identifying ideal outcomes, determining your BATNA, calculating reservation points, and evaluating risk propensity. In Canada's regulated landscape, these steps must account for regional variations, like Quebec's Civil Code or Alberta's energy benchmarks. For example, in a 2022 Quebec retail negotiation, a supplier aimed for a long-term contract, ideal outcome, but set a reservation point ensuring compliance with French-language laws. Their BATNA was pivoting to another province, and their low-risk propensity guided a conservative strategy. This led to a balanced deal. Canadian negotiators must also consider cultural factors, like Indigenous consultation protocols, to avoid missteps. Self-assessment prevents overconfidence and aligns strategies with Canada's context. Next, we'll dive into BATNA analysis to explore its components and risks. A Canadian energy firm negotiating a pipeline deal prepared by assessing environmental compliance costs as part of their BATNA, ensuring a viable fallback. This disciplined approach is key to effective negotiation and leads us to our next topic. Following self-assessment, let's examine BATNA analysis, a critical tool for Canadian negotiators. BATNA, your best alternative to a negotiated agreement, is your fallback if talks fail. Defining its components, alternatives, costs, and feasibility, requires research, especially in Canada's regulated environment. In a 2020 Ontario Telecom merger, one party's BATNA was a partnership with a smaller competitor, documented with financial and regulatory feasibility studies. Time sensitivity matters. Delays can weaken your BATNA, as seen in a British Columbia forestry negotiation where environmental compliance deadlines limited options. Counterparties may exaggerate their BATNAs to pressure you, so verify claims through market data. Canada's legal framework, like competition laws or PIPEDA, impacts BATNA feasibility. Non-compliance can void alternatives. Documenting your BATNA ensures clarity and prevents impulsive decisions. This slide underscores BATNA's role in Canada's complex landscape. Next, we'll explore reservation points to set your negotiation limits. The telecom case highlights how preparation, including regulatory research, strengthens your position. This disciplined approach prepares us for setting reservation points in the next slide. Moving from BATNA analysis, let's discuss reservation points, the minimum acceptable outcome in a negotiation. In Canada's diverse business environment, setting reservation points involves brainstorming alternative values, ordering priorities, improving your BATNA, and using fact-based benchmarks. For instance, in a 2021 Alberta energy negotiation, a firm set a reservation point for a contract based on market oil prices, ensuring profitability. They brainstormed alternatives like joint ventures and used industry data to strengthen their BATNA. In Canada, negotiators must consider regional factors, such as Quebec's language laws or Ontario's labor regulations, when setting these points. For example, a retailer in Quebec ensured their reservation point complied with French language documentation requirements, avoiding legal risks. Fact-based determination, using Canadian market benchmarks, prevents unrealistic expectations. This slide emphasizes the importance of clear limits in Canada's regulated context. Next, we'll explore risk assessment to understand potential challenges. Consider how the energy firm used data to set a realistic reservation point, balancing profitability with compliance. This approach is critical in Canada and leads us to our next topic. Continuing our preparation journey, let's focus on risk assessment, a vital step for Canadian negotiators. This involves evaluating strategic risks, BATNA risks, contractual factors, and Canadian regulatory requirements, then planning mitigation strategies. In Canada's regulated environment, risks like non-compliance with PIPEDA or provincial laws can derail negotiations. For example, in a 2019 British Columbia real estate deal, negotiators assessed risks of environmental regulation violations, ensuring their BATNA, selling to another buyer, was viable. Contractual risks, like unclear terms, were mitigated by drafting precise agreements. Canadian negotiators must also consider cultural risks, such as missteps with Indigenous partners, requiring historical research. Mitigation planning involves contingency strategies, like alternative suppliers or legal consultations. This slide highlights how risk assessment strengthens preparation in Canada's complex landscape. Next, we'll discuss endowment effects and their impact on negotiation behavior. The real estate case shows how preparation identifies and mitigates risks, ensuring robust negotiations. This sets the stage for understanding psychological factors in our next topic. Building on risk assessment, let's explore endowment effects, a psychological factor affecting negotiations in Canada. Endowment effects occur when parties overvalue what they own, creating reference point differences and buyer-seller valuation gaps. In Canada, loss aversion, fear of losing value, can complicate deals. For example, in a 2020 Toronto tech acquisition, the seller overvalued their intellectual property due to endowment effects, stalling talks. Preparation involves understanding Canadian market behaviors, like conservative valuation in real estate, and using psychological adjustment strategies, such as third-party appraisals. Negotiators must research market benchmarks to set realistic reference points. In Canada's multicultural context, endowment effects may vary. Indigenous communities may value land culturally, requiring sensitive approaches. This slide emphasizes preparing for psychological biases to avoid deadlocks. Next, we'll examine negotiator confidence and its pitfalls. The tech acquisition case illustrates how preparation, including objective valuations, counters endowment effects. This psychological insight is crucial as we transition to confidence issues. Following endowment effects, let's discuss negotiator confidence, a critical factor in Canadian negotiations. Overconfidence can lead to probability judgment errors, causing negotiators to overestimate their position. In a 2018 Vancouver retail negotiation, overconfidence led a buyer to assume they could dictate terms, ignoring the seller's BATNA, resulting in a failed deal. Preparation involves calibrating confidence with data-driven decision-making, using Canadian market data like industry benchmarks or regulatory requirements. For instance, a negotiator in Quebec prepared by researching language law compliance, avoiding overconfident assumptions. Canadian case studies show that overconfidence often stems from ignoring cultural or legal nuances, like Indigenous protocols. Calibration methods, such as scenario analysis, help align expectations with reality. This slide underscores the need for balanced confidence in Canada's complex environment. Next, we'll explore perspective taking to understand counterparties. The retail case highlights how preparation with data prevents costly errors. This leads us to perspective taking, a key skill for effective negotiation. Moving from confidence, let's explore perspective taking, a vital preparation step for Canadian negotiators. This involves identifying counterparties, distinguishing between monolithic and diverse groups, analyzing their interests and positions, and researching their BATNAs. In Canada's multicultural context, understanding counterparties, like Indigenous communities or international trade partners, is crucial. For example, in a 2021 Manitoba negotiation with an Indigenous group, the company researched historical land agreements to understand cultural interests, avoiding a fixed pie mindset. Preparation includes analyzing whether counterparties are unified or diverse, as unions or government bodies may have competing internal interests. BATNA research, using market data or public records, reveals their fallback options. Canadian cultural considerations, like Quebec's language laws or regional business norms, shape effective perspective taking. This slide highlights how understanding others' perspectives creates value. Next, we'll discuss situational awareness to assess the negotiation context. The Manitoba case shows how preparation through cultural research builds trust. This sets the stage for situational awareness, our next topic. Building on perspective taking, let's focus on situational awareness, which helps Canadian negotiators understand the negotiation's context. This involves assessing whether it's a transaction or dispute, identifying linkage effects, how one deal affects others, and understanding legal and ratification requirements. In Canada, factors like provincial regulations or Indigenous consultation protocols shape the environment. For example, in a 2020 Alberta oil deal, negotiators assessed environmental regulations and stakeholder ratification needs, identifying linkage effects with community agreements. Preparation involves researching Canada's business environment, including PIPEDA or labor laws, to anticipate challenges. Transaction negotiations, like supplier contracts, differ from disputes, like labor conflicts, requiring tailored strategies. This slide emphasizes how situational awareness aligns preparation with Canada's complex landscape. Next, we'll explore time constraints and their impact on negotiations. The Alberta case illustrates how preparation accounts for regulatory and stakeholder dynamics, ensuring strategic alignment. This leads us to time constraints. Continuing our discussion, let's examine time constraints, a critical factor in Canadian negotiations. Time affects negotiation dynamics through differential costs. Delays may hurt one party more, concession rate patterns, and deadline strategies. In Canada, industry timelines, like Ontario's manufacturing cycles or British Columbia's forestry regulations, shape preparation. For example, in a 2019 Toronto supplier contract, one party faced higher time costs due to inventory deadlines, prompting faster concessions. Preparation involves researching industry timelines and setting strategic deadlines to balance pressure. Time management techniques, like prioritizing issues or using virtual tools, ensure efficiency. In Canada's regulated environment, delays can trigger legal or cultural risks, such as missing Indigenous consultation deadlines. This slide highlights how time-aware preparation enhances outcomes. Next, we'll discuss formal versus informal agreements. The supplier case shows how preparation accounts for time pressures, aligning strategies with industry norms. This sets the stage for our next topic on agreements. Following time constraints, let's explore formal versus informal agreements, a key consideration in Canada. Formal agreements, like written contracts, contrast with informal handshake deals, which carry risks of misinterpretation. In Canada's legal environment, compliance with provincial laws or PIPEDA is critical. For example, in a 2021 Quebec retail deal, negotiators formalized a contract to meet French-language documentation requirements, avoiding disputes. Preparation involves understanding Canadian legal requirements, like contract ratification, and using documentation best practices, such as clear terms and third-party reviews. Dispute resolution mechanisms, like arbitration, should be planned. Informal agreements may work in trust-based settings but risk ambiguity in Canada's regulated context. This slide emphasizes preparation for legally sound agreements. Next, we'll discuss multi-issue negotiations. The Quebec case highlights how preparation ensures legal compliance and clarity. This leads us to multi-issue negotiations, our next topic. Moving forward, let's discuss multi-issue negotiations, common in Canada's complex business environment. This involves identifying key issues, generating alternatives, creating equivalent value proposals, and setting priorities. In Canada, negotiators face complexities like provincial regulations or Indigenous consultation requirements. For example, in a 2020 Ontario manufacturing deal, negotiators identified issues like wages, benefits, and schedules, generating alternatives like flexible hours to create value. Preparation involves researching Canadian market complexities, such as Quebec's labor laws, to propose equivalent value solutions. Priority setting, using data like industry benchmarks, ensures focus on critical issues. This slide highlights how preparation navigates Canada's multi-stakeholder landscape. Next, we'll explore cultural considerations in negotiations. The manufacturing case shows how preparation aligns multiple issues with stakeholder needs, setting the stage for cultural considerations. Building on multi-issue negotiations, let's explore cultural considerations, critical in Canada's diverse landscape. Canada's multicultural dynamics require understanding Indigenous protocols, regional variations, and communication styles. For example, in a 2021 Saskatchewan negotiation with an Indigenous community, negotiators researched historical land agreements to respect cultural protocols, ensuring trust. Preparation involves studying regional business norms, like Quebec's French language requirements, and adapting communication styles, direct in Ontario, collaborative in British Columbia. Cultural sensitivity training helps avoid missteps, especially with Indigenous partners. In Canada, ignoring cultural nuances risks failed negotiations or damaged relationships. This slide emphasizes preparation for cultural alignment. Next, we'll discuss ethical preparation in Canada's integrity-focused environment. The Saskatchewan case illustrates how cultural preparation builds trust, a key factor in Canada. This leads us to ethical considerations. Following cultural considerations, let's focus on ethical preparation, paramount in Canada's integrity-driven business culture. This involves applying ethical frameworks, adhering to Canadian standards, managing conflicts of interest, ensuring transparency, and maintaining integrity. For example, in a 2020 Toronto financial deal, negotiators disclosed potential conflicts of interest, aligning with Canada's transparency requirements under securities laws. Preparation includes researching ethical standards, like those from the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, and planning conflict management strategies, such as third-party mediators. Transparency, especially in regulated sectors like healthcare, builds trust. In Canada, ethical lapses can lead to legal or reputational damage. This slide highlights preparation for ethical negotiations. Next, we'll explore technology preparation for modern negotiations. The financial case shows how ethical preparation ensures trust and compliance, setting the stage for technology's role in negotiations. Continuing our journey, let's discuss technology preparation, increasingly vital in Canadian negotiations. This involves using digital tools, adopting virtual negotiation best practices, ensuring data security, and complying with Canadian privacy laws like PIPEDA. For example, in a 2021 virtual trade negotiation, Canadian negotiators used secure platforms to protect sensitive data, aligning with PIPEDA. Preparation includes selecting reliable collaboration tools, like encrypted video platforms, and researching best practices, such as clear virtual communication protocols. Data security is critical in Canada's regulated environment, where breaches can lead to legal penalties. This slide emphasizes technology's role in effective preparation. Next, we'll explore a labor dispute case to apply these concepts. The trade case highlights how technology preparation ensures secure, efficient negotiations, leading us to our first case study. Let's apply our concepts to a labor dispute case, a common scenario in Canada's unionized sectors. In a 2019 Ontario manufacturing firm, two issues arose: an unfair wage increase dispute and a union management conflict over benefit cuts. In the wage dispute, workers demanded a 10% raise, while management offered 2%, assuming a fixed pie where higher wages would cut profits. Preparation involved researching Ontario's industry standard wages, around 5%, defining a BATNA of hiring temporary workers, and setting a reservation point at 6%. Collaborative bargaining led to a 5% raise, aligning with market norms and preserving relationships. In the benefit cuts issue, the union prioritized health benefits, while management needed cost savings. Negotiators prepared by analyzing comparable firms' benefit packages and used interest-based problem-solving to propose a cost-sharing model, retaining benefits. For students, this case shows how preparation, researching benchmarks, understanding interests, and overcoming fixed pie perceptions, navigates Canada's labor laws and union dynamics, creating win-win outcomes. Next, we'll explore an international trade case. This case illustrates how preparation turns conflict into collaboration, a key skill in Canada's regulated labor market. Let's move to our next case study. Let's examine an international trade negotiation case, reflecting Canada's role in global markets. In a 2020 trade deal under USMCA, two issues emerged: tariff reduction discrepancies and regulatory compliance conflicts. For tariffs, Canada sought lower rates, while the counterparty resisted, assuming a fixed pie where reductions hurt revenue. Preparation involved researching trade data and Canada's USMCA priorities, defining a BATNA of alternative markets, and setting a reservation point based on industry benchmarks. Data-driven arguments, using export statistics, led to a mutual market access agreement, benefiting both sides. For regulatory conflicts, differing customs standards caused delays. Negotiators prepared by studying USMCA provisions and proposed joint solutions, like harmonized procedures, resulting in streamlined customs. For students, this case highlights preparation's role in navigating Canada's trade priorities and legal frameworks, using data to overcome fixed pie mindsets and create value. Next, we'll explore a corporate merger case. This case shows how preparation aligns with Canada's trade goals, turning disputes into partnerships. This leads us to our final case study. Our final case study focuses on corporate merger preparation, a complex scenario in Canada. In a 2021 Toronto tech merger, two issues arose: cultural integration challenges and intellectual property, IP, valuation disputes. For cultural integration, differing corporate cultures risked employee turnover. Preparation involved a pre-negotiation cultural assessment, researching both firms' values and regional norms. Ontario's tech sector emphasizes innovation. This led to a training program, achieving organizational alignment. For IP valuation, the seller overvalued assets due to endowment effects. Negotiators prepared by commissioning an independent third-party appraisal, using Canadian market benchmarks to set a fair reservation point. Their BATNA was licensing the IP instead. The outcome was a fair asset distribution agreement. For students, this case shows how preparation, cultural research and objective valuations, navigates Canada's business environment, avoiding psychological biases and ensuring equitable outcomes. This case highlights how preparation aligns diverse interests, a key skill in Canada's corporate landscape. Let's conclude with our references. As we conclude, let's review the references grounding our lecture, essential for mastering negotiation in Canada. Fisher, Yuri, and Patton's Getting to Yes, 2011, introduces interest-based negotiation, aligning with Canada's collaborative culture. Lewicki, Saunders, and Barry's Negotiation, 2015, provides frameworks with Canadian case studies, including digital negotiations relevant to our tech-driven market. Thompson's The Mind and Heart of the Negotiator, 2015, explores cognitive and emotional aspects, with Canadian examples highlighting multicultural dynamics. The Government of Canada's 2020 Indigenous Consultation Guidelines outline legal and cultural protocols for Indigenous negotiations. The Canadian Chamber of Commerce's 2019 Best Practices in Negotiation offers strategies for Canada's diverse regulatory and cultural landscape, especially in trade. These resources are critical for balancing legal, cultural, and ethical considerations in Canada's complex environment. I encourage you to explore them to refine your skills. Thank you for your attention.